The moment Georgiana Lawson felt the earth shudder beneath her boots, she knew death had come calling in the most unexpected way. She had ventured into the abandoned Silver Bell mine just outside Fort Bowie, Arizona on that frigid February morning in 1882, searching for the turquoise deposits her late father had sworn existed in the deepest tunnels. And now, she stood frozen as the rumble of an avalanche echoed through the mountain above her. The mine entrance behind her exploded with white as tons of snow crashed down from the peaks, sealing her inside the darkness with nothing but a flickering oil lamp and the pounding of her own terrified heart. She scrambled toward the entrance, her burgundy riding skirt catching on the rough stone as she ran, but by the time she reached the mouth of the tunnel, a solid wall of packed snow and ice blocked her path completely. Georgiana clawed at it with her gloved hands, her breath coming in sharp gasps that created clouds in the freezing air. The lamp swung wildly from her other hand, casting monstrous shadows on the dripping walls. "Help!" she screamed, knowing even as the word left her lips that no one could hear her through the barrier of snow. "Somebody help me!" The only answer was the settling groan of the mountain and the distant drip of water somewhere in the depths behind her. Georgiana pressed her forehead against the icy wall, fighting down the panic that threatened to consume her. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and had come to Arizona Territory 6 months ago to settle her father's mining claims after consumption had taken him in the spring. The small room she rented above the general store would be empty for hours, yet before anyone noticed her absence. She had told no one where she was going that morning, not wanting to share the secret of the turquoise her father had mentioned in his final delirious ramblings. Now that secrecy might cost her everything, Georgiana forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly despite the fear coursing through her veins. The lamp had perhaps 3 hours of oil remaining. She had a canteen of water on her belt, a few strips of dried beef in her coat pocket, and a small knife her father had given her years ago. Not much to survive on, but she had heard stories of miners trapped for days who had lived to tell the tale. She turned away from the blocked entrance and held the lamp high, surveying the tunnel that stretched into the darkness ahead. The Silver Bell had been abandoned 5 years earlier, when the silver vein had supposedly run dry, but the tunnels themselves were still sound, supported by thick timber beams every few yards. Her father had worked this mine in its heyday, had known every twist and turn of its passages, and had shared those memories with her during his final months. There might be another way out. Some of the older mines had multiple entrances, ventilation shafts, or connected to other tunnel systems. It was a slim hope, but hope nonetheless. Georgiana wrapped her wool coat tighter around herself and began walking deeper into the mine, her boots crunching on loose gravel. The temperature dropped as she moved away from the blocked entrance, and she could see her breath in the lamplight. The tunnel sloped downward, and the walls grew narrower, closing in until she had to turn sideways in places to squeeze through. Water trickled down the stone, and in some places, icicles hung from the ceiling like crystal daggers. She walked for what felt like an eternity, though her pocket watch told her it had been only 40 minutes. The tunnel branched several times, and she carefully marked her path with small piles of stones, not wanting to lose her way in the labyrinth. At one junction, she found an old pickaxe leaning against the wall, its handle worn smooth by years of use. She took it with her, thinking it might prove useful for digging or defense, though she tried not to consider what she might need to defend herself against in the depths of an abandoned mine. The lamp began to flicker, and Georgiana's heart sank. She had perhaps an hour of light remaining, maybe less. She quickened her pace, following what seemed to be the main passage, praying it would lead to another exit, or at least a larger chamber where she might find supplies or evidence of another way out. Instead, she found a cave-in. The passage ahead was completely blocked by fallen rock and timber, the ceiling having collapsed at some point in the years since the mine's abandonment. Georgiana set down the lamp and the pickaxe, pressing her hands against her face. Tears burned hot against her cold cheeks, but she refused to let them fall. Crying would accomplish nothing. Her father had always said that Lawsons were fighters, that they never gave up even when the odds seemed impossible. She turned back, retracing her steps to the last junction, and took a different branch. This passage was even narrower, barely wide enough for her shoulders, and the ceiling hung so low that she had to duck to avoid hitting her head. The lamp threw wild shadows that made it impossible to judge distances, and twice she nearly tripped over debris on the floor. Then she heard it. A sound so faint she thought at first she had imagined it, a rhythmic tapping, metal on stone coming from somewhere above and ahead of her. Georgiana froze, listening intently. There it was again, distant, but unmistakable. Someone was digging. "Hello!" she screamed, her voice breaking with hope and desperation. "Hello! I'm down here! I'm trapped!" The tapping stopped. For a moment there was only silence, and Georgiana feared she had imagined the whole thing. Then it resumed, faster now, more urgent. Someone had heard her. Someone was coming. She moved toward the sound, navigating by ear as much as by sight. The passage climbed steeply, and she had to use her hands to pull herself up over sections where the floor had eroded away. The tapping grew louder, and now she could hear voices, muffled and indistinct, but definitely human. Male voices, she thought, calling to each other. "I'm here!" she shouted again. "Keep digging! I'm here!" A shower of snow and gravel burst through the ceiling 10 yards ahead of her, and a shaft of gray daylight pierced the darkness. Georgiana laughed, a sound that was half sob, and rushed forward. More snow fell away, and the hole widened. She could see the sky now, heavy with clouds that promised more snow, and then a face appeared in the opening, silhouetted against the light. "Got someone down there," the man called over his shoulder. Then, to her, "Madam, are you hurt?" "No," Georgiana called back. "Just cold and frightened. Can you get me out?" "Working on it. Stand back from the opening." She retreated a few steps as more snow and rock cascaded down. The hole widened steadily, and now she could see 2 men working at the opening, one swinging a pickaxe while the other shoveled away the debris. The first man dropped through the hole, landing in a crouch on the tunnel floor. He straightened, and Georgiana found herself looking up at a tall cowboy with dark hair that curled over his collar, and eyes so blue they seemed almost unreal in the lamplight. "Quinton Harrison," he said, touching the brim of his snow-covered hat. "We saw the avalanche from the ranch and came to check if anyone might be trapped. Didn't expect to actually find someone alive in here." "Georgiana Lawson," she managed, suddenly very aware of how disheveled she must look, her red hair escaping from its pins and her face probably smudged with dirt. "I was looking for turquoise deposits when the snow came down." Quinton's eyebrows rose. "You came into an abandoned mine alone? That's about the most foolish thing I've heard this week, and my ranch hand tried to ride an unbroken Mustang yesterday." Under other circumstances, Georgiana might have bristled at being called foolish, but she was too grateful to be offended. "Yes, well, I've learned my lesson. Can we discuss my poor judgment after we're out of this death trap?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, and he gestured to the opening above. "Fair enough. Can you climb, or do you need help?" "I can climb." She set down the lamp and tucked the pickaxe into her belt, then approached the opening. Quinton cupped his hands to give her a boost, and she stepped into them, trying to ignore the strength in his arms as he lifted her toward the hole. Her fingers grasped the edge, and she pulled herself up with the other man's help, emerging into the blinding whiteness of a world transformed by snow. The second man was older, perhaps 50, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Thomas Brooks," he introduced himself. "Quinton's foreman. Good thing you had that lamp lit, or we never would have heard you over the wind." Georgiana looked around, getting her bearings. They were on the slope above the mine entrance, and she could see the massive pile of snow that had sealed the tunnel mouth below. The storm clouds hung low and menacing, and snowflakes had begun to fall again, thick and fast. 3 horses stood huddled together near a stand of pines, their heads down against the wind. Quinton emerged from the hole behind her, pulling himself up with easy strength. "We need to get moving," he said, scanning the sky. "Another storm's coming in, and we're a good 2 hours from the ranch, even pushing hard." "I have a room in Fort Bowie," Georgiana said. "If you could just take me back to town." "Town's 3 hours south, and we'd be riding straight into the storm," Quinton interrupted. "The ranch is closer, and my mother will have my hide if I don't offer you proper hospitality after what you've been through. You can rest there tonight and head back to Fort Bowie in the morning when the weather clears." Georgiana wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, but the cold was seeping through her coat and her legs felt shaky from the ordeal. She nodded. "Thank you. I'm grateful for the rescue and the shelter." Quinton walked to the horses and returned leading a sturdy bay mare. "This is Copper. She's gentle and sure-footed. Thomas and I will ride double on my horse." He helped her into the saddle, his hands steady on her waist, and for a moment their eyes met. Georgiana felt something pass between them, a current of awareness that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way his gaze seemed to see right through her careful defenses. Then he stepped back, and the moment passed. The ride to the Harrison ranch was brutal. The wind howled down from the mountains, driving snow into their faces and making it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. Quinton rode in the lead, somehow navigating through the white chaos, while Thomas brought up the rear to make sure no one fell behind. Georgiana clung to the saddle horn, her hands numb despite her gloves, and tried not to think about what would have happened if these men had not come looking for survivors. When the ranch buildings finally emerged from the storm, Georgiana could have wept with relief. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a wide porch and smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Outbuildings dotted the property, and she could see the dark shapes of cattle huddled in a protected valley below. It was a prosperous spread, the kind that required years of hard work and smart management to build. Quinton dismounted and came to help her down. "Can you walk?" "I think so." But when her feet hit the ground, her legs buckled, and only his quick reflexes kept her from falling. He swept her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. "Stubborn and proud," he observed. "You'll fit right in with my family." The front door burst open before they reached it, and a woman who could only be Quinton's mother rushed out, her dark hair streaked with silver and her face creased with concern. "Lord have mercy, you found someone. Bring her inside, quickly now. Thomas, see to the horses and then get yourself warm. I'll have Rosa prepare something hot to drink." The interior of the house was blessedly warm, heated by a massive fireplace in the main room and a cast-iron stove in what appeared to be the kitchen. Quinton carried Georgiana to a chair near the fire and set her down gently. His mother fussed over her immediately, removing her wet coat and wrapping her in a thick quilt. "I'm Helena Harrison," she said, kneeling to unlace Georgiana's sodden boots. "And you've already met my son, I see. What on earth were you doing up at the Silver Bell in weather like this?" "Being foolish, according to your son," Georgiana admitted. "I'm Georgiana Lawson. My father used to work the Silver Bell years ago, and I was looking into his old claims." Helena's expression softened. "You're Marcus Lawson's girl? I heard you'd come to settle his affairs. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man, if a bit obsessed with finding the perfect turquoise." "You knew him?" "Everyone in this part of Arizona knew Marcus. He used to sell my husband the turquoise he found for my birthday presents," Helena smiled sadly. "Before the consumption took him too, 4 years past." "I'm sorry," Georgiana said softly, and meant it. The pain of loss was something she understood all too well. A young Mexican woman appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray laden with steaming mugs. Helena took 2 and handed one to Georgiana. "Hot chocolate with a bit of whiskey. It will warm you from the inside out." Quinton had removed his own wet outer clothes and stood by the fire, warming his hands. In the better light, Georgiana could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and the kind of lean, muscular build that came from years of ranch work. His blue eyes remained fixed on her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "How long were you trapped?" he asked. "I'm not certain. Perhaps 3 hours? It felt like an eternity." She sipped the hot chocolate, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "How did you know to look there?" "We saw the avalanche from the south pasture. The Silver Bell is on Harrison land now. My father bought the claim when it was abandoned, thinking he might reopen it someday. When we saw the snow come down, I figured it was worth checking if anyone had taken shelter in the entrance." He shook his head. "I didn't think we'd find anyone actually inside the tunnels." "Providence," Helena said firmly. "The good Lord was watching over you today, Miss Lawson." "I prefer to think that good men were watching," Georgiana replied, looking at Quinton. "Thank you. You saved my life." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she could not quite name. "Just did what anyone would do." "No," she said quietly. "Not anyone. You risked your own safety to dig through to me. That takes a special kind of courage." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an awareness that made Helena look back and forth between them with interest. Before anyone could speak, a door at the back of the house slammed open, and 3 more people bustled in, stomping snow from their boots and talking loudly. Is it true? A young man called, pulling off his hat to reveal hair as dark as Quinton's. Thomas said you pulled someone out of the Silver Bell? Mind your manners, Jacob, Helena chided. We have a guest. The young man, who looked to be about 20, offered Georgiana a charming grin. Jacob Harrison, madam, the better-looking brother. The younger and more foolish brother, Quinton corrected, but there was affection in his voice. The other two newcomers were ranch hands, older men who nodded respectfully to Georgiana before heading to the kitchen to warm up. Helena shooed Jacob away and turned her attention back to Georgiana. You must be exhausted. Let me show you to a room where you can rest and freshen up. I'll bring you some dry clothes and we'll have supper when you're ready. Georgiana wanted to protest that she was fine, but the truth was that she felt utterly drained, her body finally registering the shock of her ordeal now that she was safe. She let Helena guide her to a small but comfortable bedroom at the back of the house, and when she was alone, she sank onto the bed and allowed herself to cry. The tears came hard and fast, a release of all the fear and loneliness she had been holding inside for months. She cried for her father, for the life she had left behind in Missouri, for the terror of being trapped in the darkness with death creeping closer with every flicker of the lamp. And she cried with relief, with gratitude that she was alive and warm and safe. When the storm passed, she washed her face in the basin Helena had provided and changed into the simple cotton dress that had been laid out on the bed. It was a bit too large, but it was clean and dry, and that was all that mattered. She braided her damp hair and pinned it up, then steeled herself to face the Harrison family. She found them gathered around a large dining table, the meal already laid out. Quinton stood when she entered, pulling out a chair beside his. You look better, he observed, some colors back in your cheeks. I feel better, thank you. She took the offered seat, acutely aware of his proximity as he settled back into his own chair. The food was simple but delicious, beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread that Helena had clearly baked that morning. The conversation flowed easily, Jacob teasing his brother about various ranch mishaps, while Helena kept everyone's plates full and asked Georgiana gentle questions about her life in Missouri and her plans for her father's claims. The turquoise, Quinton said during a lull in the conversation. Did your father's note say specifically where in the mine he thought the deposits were? Georgiana hesitated. She had not shown anyone her father's journal, the leather-bound book where he had recorded his thoughts and observations during his years in Arizona. He mentioned the deep tunnels, past the old silver veins. He was convinced there was a network of turquoise running through the rock there, better quality than anything found in the area before. And you were going to mine it yourself? There was no judgment in Quinton's tone, only curiosity. I was going to verify it existed first, then decide what to do. I'm not a miner, Mr. Harrison, but I am my father's heir, and I owe it to his memory to see if his last dream had any truth to it. Call me Quinton, please, and I understand about honoring your father's dreams. He glanced at his mother. My father wanted to see this ranch become the finest cattle operation in Arizona territory. Took everything he had, and quite a bit he didn't to make it happen. When he died, I wondered if I could keep it going. But that's what family does. We carry on their work. The understanding in his eyes made Georgiana's throat tighten. Here was someone who truly understood the weight of legacy, the burden and gift of continuing what those before you had started. After supper, Helena insisted that Georgiana rest, but she felt restless, her mind too active for sleep despite her body's exhaustion. Quinton found her standing on the back porch, watching the snow fall in the darkness. Can't sleep? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Too much to think about. She pulled the borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders. The mine entrance is completely blocked. Even if the turquoise is there, I have no way to access it now, and I don't have the funds to hire men to dig it out properly. The snow will melt in a few weeks, Quinton said. Come spring, we could clear the entrance together. I'd like to see if your father was right about the turquoise. And as I said, the claim is on Harrison land now, so we have an interest in knowing what's down there. You would help me? Why? He turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light from the windows. Because you almost died today, looking for something that mattered to you, and that takes a kind of determination I respect. Because your father was a friend to my family. And because I find myself wanting to spend more time with you, Georgiana Lawson. Her breath caught at the honesty in his words. You don't know me. Then let me get to know you. Stay at the ranch for a few days. The roads to Fort Bowie will be impassable anyway, until the snow melts some. We have the room, and my mother would enjoy the company of another woman. It was madness to even consider it. She was an unmarried woman, and propriety demanded she return to town as soon as possible. But the thought of going back to that lonely room above the general store, with nothing but her father's journal and her own thoughts for company, made her heart sink. I couldn't impose, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not an imposition if it's an invitation. Quinton smiled, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and more carefree. Stay, Georgiana, at least until the weather clears. She looked out at the falling snow, at the lights of the ranch buildings, at the mountains looming dark in the distance where she had nearly died that morning. And she thought about how Quinton's arms had felt when he lifted her from the mine, strong and safe. She thought about the way he looked at her, as if she were someone worth knowing, worth saving. All right, she said softly. I'll stay. The next 3 days passed in a blur of unexpected contentment. The storm continued to rage, dumping more snow on the already blanketed landscape and making travel impossible. Georgiana found herself drawn into the rhythms of ranch life, helping Helena with cooking and mending, playing cards with Jacob in the evenings, and spending long hours in conversation with Quinton as they worked on various indoor tasks. She learned that he had traveled to San Francisco once to study ranching techniques, that he loved books almost as much as she did, and that he had turned down an offer to work for a large cattle company in Texas because he could not imagine leaving Arizona. He told her about his father's death, how a horse had thrown him, and the injuries had taken him slowly, painfully, over the course of months. In return, she shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, of her mother's death when she was 12, and how her father had tried his best to raise a daughter alone. She told him about the moment she received the telegram about her father's death, how she had felt utterly adrift until she decided to come to Arizona and see the land he had loved for herself. Do you miss Missouri? Quinton asked one afternoon as they sat in the study, ostensibly going through ranch accounts but mostly just talking. I miss the familiarity of it, Georgiana admitted, but Missouri was where I lived. Arizona feels like it could be home. Could be. She met his gaze, feeling the pull between them that had been growing stronger each day. That depends on whether I have reason to stay. Quinton set down the ledger he had been holding. Georgiana, I know we've only known each other a few days, but I need you to understand something. When I pulled you out of that mine, when I saw you standing there in the darkness, scared but not broken, I felt something I've never felt before, like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Quinton, let me finish. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. I know it's too soon. I know all the reasons this doesn't make sense. But I also know that life is uncertain, that mines collapse and horses throw their riders and storms come without warning. I don't want to waste time pretending I don't feel what I feel. And what do you feel? Georgiana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Like I want to know everything about you. Like I want to be the person you turn to when you're scared or happy or angry. Like I want to wake up every morning and see your face across the breakfast table. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I'm falling in love with you, Georgiana. Maybe I already have. The tears that sprang to her eyes were not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. I thought I was losing my mind, she confessed. I've been trying so hard not to read too much into every look, every conversation. But Quinton, I feel it too. This connection between us, it's not just gratitude for the rescue. It's something deeper. Then we're not losing our minds, he said, smiling. Or maybe we both are together. She laughed, a sound of pure joy, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. The kiss was everything she had not known she was waiting for, a homecoming and an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he murmured. Not just until the snow melts. Stay and see where this leads. Let me court you properly, the way you deserve. Yes, Georgiana said, and knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. Yes, I'll stay. Helena was delighted when they told her, though she was careful to remind them both that propriety must be observed. The last thing either of you needs is gossip, she said firmly. Quinton may court you, but you will maintain separate bedrooms, and there will be no wandering the halls at night. I won't have anyone questioning your reputation, Georgiana. Georgiana, who had never cared much for society's rules but understood the practical necessity of following them, agreed readily. She moved into the guest room permanently, contributing to the household by taking over some of Helena's duties and earning her keep. She wrote to the landlord in Fort Bowie to give up her room and have her belongings sent to the ranch. As January gave way to February, the snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Quinton took Georgiana riding through the ranch, showing her the cattle that would soon calve in the spring, the horses he was training, the wild beauty of the Arizona landscape. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared passions and friendly disagreements that made their conversations spark with energy. One evening, Jacob pulled Georgiana aside in the barn where she was grooming one of the horses. "I just want to say thank you," he said, looking uncharacteristically serious. "For what?" "For making my brother happy. I haven't seen him smile like this since before Pa died. He's been carrying the weight of the whole ranch on his shoulders, and I think he forgot how to be anything but responsible. You remind him that there's more to life than duty." Georgiana felt warmth spread through her chest. "He makes me happy too. I didn't expect to find anything like this when I came to Arizona." "That's how the best things happen," Jacob said wisely, "when you're not looking for them." As February progressed, Quinton and Thomas began making preparations to clear the mine entrance. They recruited several ranch hands to help with the work, and on a clear, cold morning in mid-February, they rode up to the Silver Bell with shovels and pickaxes. Georgiana insisted on coming along, despite Quinton's protests. "It's my father's claim," she said firmly. "I'm not going to sit at home while you do all the work." The snow had melted enough that they could see where the entrance had been, but several feet of packed ice and frozen earth still blocked the way. The men took turns digging, making slow but steady progress. Georgiana brought them water and hot coffee from a canteen, and when one of the younger ranch hands grew tired, she took his shovel and dug alongside the men until Quinton gently took it from her. "You're going to wear yourself out," he chided. "I'm stronger than I look," she retorted, but accepted the rest. It took 3 full days of work, but finally they broke through, opening the entrance enough for a man to walk in upright. Quinton insisted on going in first to make sure the tunnels were safe before he would let Georgiana enter. When he emerged and gave the all clear, Georgiana descended into the mine with him at her side, both carrying bright lanterns. She led him through the passages she had explored before, past the junctions she had marked with stones, to the area her father's journal had described as the most promising. They searched for hours, examining the rock walls carefully in the lantern light. Just when Georgiana was beginning to think her father's turquoise was nothing but a fever dream, Quinton called out, "Here, look at this." She hurried to his side, and there in the wall was a seam of brilliant blue-green turquoise, running through the rock like a vein of frozen sky. It was beautiful, more vibrant than any turquoise she had seen in the jewelry shops in Fort Bowie, and the seam appeared to be several feet thick. "He was right," Georgiana breathed, running her fingers over the stone. "He was actually right." Quinton wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Your father had a good eye. This is high-quality stone. With proper mining, it could be worth a considerable amount." They spent another hour exploring, finding 3 more seams of turquoise in the deep tunnels, all of them substantial. When they finally emerged into the afternoon sunlight, Georgiana felt as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. Her father's last dream had not been the ramblings of a dying man. He had found something real, something valuable, and she had honored his memory by confirming it. "What will you do with it?" Quinton asked as they rode back to the ranch. "I don't know yet," Georgiana admitted. "I need to think about it, plan it properly. Maybe hire a professional miner to assess the full extent of the deposits." "We could do it together," Quinton suggested. "A partnership. You own the claim. I have the resources and the men to do the actual mining. We split the profits fairly." Georgiana looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his face. This was not about money for him. This was about giving her something of her own, a way to honor her father while building something new. "That seems more than fair." "Then we have a deal." He extended his hand and she shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. That night, Helena announced that they would be hosting a small gathering to celebrate the early arrival of spring. "Just a few neighbors and friends," she said. "It's been too long since we had music and dancing at the ranch." The gathering turned into a proper party, with 20 people crowding into the Harrison house, bringing food and instruments and enough energy to raise the roof. Georgiana found herself swept into the festivities, dancing with ranch hands and neighboring ranchers alike, laughing at jokes she did not quite understand and feeling more alive than she had in years. But it was Quinton she returned to again and again, his hand finding hers between dances, his eyes following her around the room. When someone struck up a waltz on the fiddle, he claimed her formally, leading her onto the improvised dance floor with a courtly bow that made her giggle. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Harrison," she said as they moved together in perfect rhythm. "I had a good teacher. My mother insisted both her sons learn to dance properly, said it was the mark of a gentleman." He spun her gracefully, then pulled her back close. "What about you? Where did a Missouri girl learn to waltz?" "My mother, before she died. She said every woman should know how to dance, even if she lived in a place where there was no one to dance with." Georgiana felt the old sadness of her mother's loss, but it was gentler now, softened by time and new happiness. "I think she would have liked you." "I know I would have liked her if she raised a daughter like you." Quinton's expression grew serious. "Georgiana, I want to talk to you about something. Can we step outside for a moment?" Her heart began to race as they slipped out onto the porch, away from the noise and warmth of the party. The night air was cool but not cold, and the stars overhead were brilliant in the clear sky. Quinton took both her hands in his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "I know we agreed I would court you properly, and I meant it. But I also meant what I said about not wasting time." He took a deep breath. "Georgiana Lawson, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you laugh when something surprises you. I love how you cried over that turquoise not because it was valuable, but because it proved your father right. I love who I am when I'm with you." Tears pricked at Georgiana's eyes. "Quinton, let me finish," he said, smiling nervously. "I know it's only been 6 weeks since I pulled you out of that mine. I know people will say it's too fast, too reckless. But I also know that when you find something worth holding on to, you don't let go just because the timing seems wrong. So I'm asking you, Georgiana, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" The word yes burst from her lips before she could even think about it, pure and certain and right. "Yes, Quinton. Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and somewhere in the house behind them, someone must have been watching because a cheer went up. They broke apart laughing and found Helena standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she said, pulling them both into a fierce hug. "I knew from the first day that you two were meant for each other." The party transformed into an engagement celebration, with toasts and well wishes raining down on them from all sides. Jacob shook his brother's hand with genuine happiness, then kissed Georgiana's cheek and welcomed her to the family. Thomas Brooks, the foreman, presented them with a silver horseshoe he had found years ago, saying it was for luck. The neighboring ranchers' wives immediately began planning the wedding, discussing dates and flowers and who would make the cake. Georgiana felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of love from these people she had barely known 2 months ago. This was what family felt like, she realized. Not just blood relations, but a community that welcomed you in and made you one of their own. She and Quinton were married on a brilliant day in late March, when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom in the valleys, and the last of the snow clung only to the highest peaks. They held the ceremony at the ranch, with a circuit preacher officiating and what seemed like half of Fort Bowie in attendance. Georgiana wore a dress of cream-colored lace that Helena had worn at her own wedding, altered to fit Georgiana's slimmer frame. Quinton stood at the makeshift altar in a new suit, his dark hair slicked back and his blue eyes shining with emotion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinton lifted her veil and kissed her so tenderly that Georgiana forgot to breathe. The applause was deafening, but she heard none of it, lost in the sensation of his lips on hers and the knowledge that this man was her husband, her partner, her home. The reception lasted well into the night, with food and drink flowing freely and dancing that grew more enthusiastic as the evening wore on. Georgiana danced with her new husband, with Jacob, with Thomas, with what felt like every man in Arizona territory. But always she returned to Quinton, drawn to him like a compass to true north. When they finally retired to the room that was now theirs, the one Helena had quietly moved them into during the preparations, Georgiana felt nervous for the first time all day. Quinton seemed to sense her hesitation because he simply took her hand and led her to sit beside him on the bed. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said gently. "I can sleep in the chair, or—" Georgiana silenced him with a kiss. "I'm not nervous because I'm unsure," she said when they parted. "I'm nervous because I'm so certain, because this matters so much." "It matters to me, too," Quinton said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You matter to me more than anything in this world." They came together slowly, tenderly, learning each other with patience and care. Georgiana had been frightened that the physical aspect of marriage would be something to endure, but with Quinton it was nothing like that. It was intimate and sweet and deeply moving, a giving and receiving that left her feeling cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Happier than I knew was possible," Georgiana replied honestly. "When I was trapped in that mine, I thought my life was ending before it had really begun. But you saved me, Quinton. Not just from the snow, but from the loneliness I didn't even know was crushing me." "You saved me too," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I was so focused on the ranch, on honoring my father's memory, that I forgot to live. You reminded me that there's more to life than duty and responsibility." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and when Georgiana woke to the Arizona sunrise streaming through the window, she felt more at peace than she had since her father's death. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. They hired a professional miner named Samuel Carter to assess the turquoise deposits in the Silver Bell, and his report exceeded their wildest hopes. The quality and quantity of the turquoise was substantial, potentially yielding thousands of dollars worth of gemstones if mined carefully and sold to the right buyers. Quinton insisted that the majority of the profits go to Georgiana, since it was her father's claim and her courage that had led to the discovery. She argued for a true partnership, 50-50, and they eventually compromised with a 60-40 split in her favor. With her share, Georgiana was able to pay off the debts her father had left behind and still have a substantial sum to invest in the ranch. The mining operation began in earnest in May, with a crew of 6 men working the Silver Bell under Samuel's supervision. Quinton split his time between overseeing the mining and managing the cattle operation, and Georgiana often found herself riding out to the mine to bring supplies and check on progress. She had a head for numbers, it turned out, and took over the bookkeeping for both the ranch and the mine, freeing Quinton to focus on the physical work he loved. They fell into a rhythm, partners in every sense of the word. Helena taught Georgiana the finer points of running a ranch household, from preserving vegetables to treating minor injuries among the hands. Georgiana taught Helena to read music from the books she had brought from Missouri, and they spent pleasant evenings at the piano that had been Quinton's father's pride and joy. Jacob became like the brother Georgiana had never had, teasing her mercilessly but also fiercely protective. When a traveling salesman made an inappropriate comment to her in Fort Bowie, Jacob was the one who stepped in before Quinton could, his usually cheerful face dark with anger. The salesman left town that same day. In August, Georgiana discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinton one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy, excitement, and a tender protectiveness that made her laugh even as tears ran down her face. "I'm going to be a father," he kept repeating, as if he could not quite believe it. "We're going to have a baby." "You're going to be a wonderful father," Georgiana assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Patient and kind and strong, just like you are with me." Helena cried when they told her, and Jacob whooped loud enough to wake the horses. The ranch hands offered gruff congratulations and started making a cradle in the workshop, arguing good-naturedly over the best way to join the wood. The neighboring families brought gifts and advice, some welcome and some decidedly less so. Georgiana's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she found herself exhausted by the Arizona heat as summer stretched into fall. Quinton refused to let her do any heavy work, which led to several spirited arguments that he always won by the simple expedient of picking her up and carrying her to a chair whenever she got too stubborn. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested after one such incident. "I know that, but you're carrying the most precious thing in my world, and I'm not taking any chances," Quinton replied, kissing the tip of her nose. She could not argue with that kind of devotion. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1883, almost exactly 1 year after the avalanche that had brought his parents together. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Georgiana feared she would not survive it. But Helena was there, steady and calm, guiding her through each contraction, and Quinton was there, holding her hand and whispering words of love and encouragement, until finally, the baby's cry filled the room. "A boy," Helena announced, tears streaming down her face. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Quinton cut the cord with shaking hands, then placed their son on Georgiana's chest. She looked down at the tiny red-faced infant, at his shock of dark hair and his eyes that would probably turn blue like his father's, and felt a love so profound it nearly stopped her heart. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." "What should we name him?" Quinton asked, his voice rough with emotion. Georgiana had been thinking about this for months. "Marcus," she said, "Marcus Quinn Harrison. After my father and after you." Quinton's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. He's perfect." They spent the next weeks learning to be parents, navigating the challenges of feeding schedules and sleepless nights, and the constant worry that came with caring for such a tiny, helpless creature. But there were also moments of breathtaking beauty, the way Marcus would grip Quinton's finger with his whole tiny hand, the soft sounds he made when he nursed, the way his face would light up when he saw his parents. Helena was a godsend, helping with the baby when Georgiana was too exhausted to function and teaching her all the things a new mother needed to know. Jacob was surprisingly good with his nephew, making funny faces to get him to smile and singing off key lullabies that somehow worked better than proper ones. As winter gave way to spring, the turquoise mine continued to produce high-quality stones that sold for top dollar in San Francisco and even as far east as New York. The Harrison Ranch was thriving, the cattle healthy and multiplying, and Quinton's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew throughout the territory. Georgiana found herself busier than she had ever been, balancing motherhood with her responsibilities for the mine's finances and her growing involvement in Fort Bowie's nascent school board. The town was growing rapidly, and she felt strongly that the children needed a proper education. She organized fundraisers and lobbied the territorial government for resources, and by the time Marcus was 6 months old, Fort Bowie had a brand new schoolhouse with a teacher imported from St. Louis. "You're going to change this whole territory," Quinton told her one night as they lay in bed, Marcus asleep in his cradle beside them. "You're not content to just live in Arizona. You want to make it better." "Is that so wrong?" Georgiana asked. "It's one of the reasons I love you," he replied, pulling her close. "You never stop fighting for what matters." As Marcus grew from an infant into a toddler, Georgiana marveled at how quickly time passed. One day he was barely able to lift his head, and the next he was crawling at lightning speed across the floor. His first word was "Mama," which made Georgiana cry with happiness. His second word was "Papa," which made Quinton walk around grinning like a fool for days. By the time Marcus was 2, Georgiana discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was not also dealing with the stress of a new marriage and a mining operation. Either way, she felt strong and capable throughout, even as her belly swelled and her ankles grew puffy in the summer heat. Their daughter was born on a mild October evening in 1885, arriving so quickly that Helena barely had time to prepare. Quinton delivered his own daughter with Helena coaching him through it, and when he placed the squalling infant in Georgiana's arms, his hands were steady despite the tears on his face. "She has your red hair," he observed, his voice full of wonder. "And your stubbornness, if the speed of her arrival is any indication," Georgiana replied, laughing and crying at the same time. They named her Emma Rose, and Marcus was immediately smitten with his baby sister. He wanted to help with everything, from diaper changes to feeding, and proved to be a surprisingly gentle and patient older brother. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding to include sheep in addition to cattle after Quinton struck a deal with a Navajo trader. The turquoise mine operated steadily, producing enough income that Georgiana was able to establish a trust fund for her children's education and donate substantial sums to various civic improvements in Fort Bowie. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, Georgiana was in her 50s, her red hair now streaked with silver, but her green eyes as bright as ever. Marcus had taken over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, while Emma had surprised everyone by becoming a respected geologist, studying rock formations throughout the Southwest. Both children had married well, and Georgiana and Quinton found themselves surrounded by grandchildren who kept them young despite their advancing years. One spring evening, Quinton took Georgiana riding up to the Silver Bell mine, which had been closed for nearly a decade after the accessible turquoise deposits had been fully mined. They sat on a flat rock near the entrance, now clear and safe, looking out over the valley that spread below them. "Do you ever think about that day?" Quinton asked. "When you were trapped and I dug through to find you?" "All the time," Georgiana admitted. "Sometimes I wake up in the night and for a moment I'm back in that darkness, thinking I'm going to die alone. And then I feel you beside me, and I remember that I survived, that you saved me." "We saved each other," Quinton corrected. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, Georgiana. You gave me a reason to truly live, not just exist." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me a life I never dreamed possible." She turned to look up at him, this man who had been her husband for more than 30 years. "For loving me the way you do." "That was never a choice," Quinton said softly, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "Loving you is as natural as breathing. It's who I am." He kissed her then, and it was as sweet and stirring as the first kiss they had shared on the night he proposed. Time had changed them both, lines etching their faces and silver threading their hair, but the essential connection between them remained as strong as ever. They stayed at the mine until the sun set, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple to deep blue. Stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding, the births of their children, every triumph and challenge of their life together. "Thank you," Georgiana said again as they mounted their horses for the ride home. "For what this time?" Quinton asked, amused. "For being the kind of man who would dig through snow and ice to save someone he had never met. For being the kind of man who would build a life with that someone, who would honor her and cherish her and make her feel treasured every single day." Quinton reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "And thank you for being the kind of woman worth saving, worth knowing, worth loving for a lifetime." They rode back to the ranch as the stars wheeled overhead, and Georgiana thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How a tragedy could become a blessing, how getting trapped in a mine could lead to finding freedom in love. She thought about her father, who had inadvertently brought her to Arizona in his death, and about Quinton's father, whose ranch had become her home. She thought about all the twists and turns that had led her to this moment, riding beside the man she loved with her whole heart, heading toward a house full of family and warmth and laughter. When they reached the ranch, they found it ablaze with light and noise. Marcus and his wife had brought the grandchildren for a surprise visit, and Emma had arrived from her latest expedition with fascinating rock samples and stories of adventure. Helena, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, presided over the chaos with obvious delight. Jacob and his family had come from their own ranch 20 miles away, unwilling to miss the impromptu gathering. Georgiana and Quinton stood on the porch for a moment, taking it all in this life they had built together, this family that had grown from 2 people who had met in the most unlikely of circumstances. "We did all right, didn't we?" Quinton said, his arm around her waist. "We did more than all right," Georgiana replied, turning to kiss his cheek. We did something extraordinary. They walked into the house together, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner, and Georgiana felt her heart overflow with gratitude. She had come to Arizona looking for turquoise to honor her father's memory, and she had found it. But she had also found something infinitely more precious, a love that had saved her, sustained her, and would remain with her until the end of her days. That night, after the guests had departed and the grandchildren had been tucked into beds scattered throughout the house, Georgiana and Quinton lay in their room, comfortable in each other's arms as they had been for decades. "I love you," Quinton murmured, half asleep. "I love you too," Georgiana replied, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "More than I could ever put into words." She closed her eyes, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, and let herself drift toward sleep. As she hovered on the edge of dreams, she thought she heard the distant echo of a pickaxe striking stone, the sound that had brought them together. But it was only the wind in the eaves, the night settling around the ranch, the world turning as it always did. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Arizona mountains and painted the sky with gold, Georgiana would wake beside the man who had dug through snow and ice to reach her, who had spent every day since reaching for her in 1,000 different ways. She would wake to a life rich with love and purpose and meaning, a life that had begun in darkness and fear but had blossomed into something more beautiful than she could have imagined. This was her happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending, but something real and earned and infinitely precious. And as she drifted off to sleep in Quinton's arms, Georgiana smiled, knowing that some rescues saved more than just a life. Some rescues saved a soul, a heart, a future, bright with promise, and that was the greatest treasure of all.